Today I'm coming to you from a hotel room because I'm down in Los Angeles for the LA Auto Show, and I just received a treasure trove of information on what looks to be the best three-row EV that's going to be available on sale in the US next year. This is the all-new Lucid Gravity, and if you have a reservation on a Rivian R1S or maybe even a Volvo EX90, you might want to put your reservation on hold and wait until this model comes out. As you're watching this video, I'm probably crawling around the Gravity on the LA show floor, so be sure and post your burning questions down there, and I'll get to as many as I can in the follow-up video, where hopefully I'll be able to bring you even more detail on this new three-row SUV. What I find most interesting about the Gravity is that Lucid is going in a slightly different direction as far as their target for this vehicle than, say, a Rivian R1S, which is certainly in the price range of this. They say that the Gravity is going to start around $80,000. So certainly think Rivian R1S, definitely Tesla Model X, definitely Volvo EX90 as far as the competitive set. But this is going to be more efficient, it's going to give you longer range, and it's going to be bigger inside than really anything that we've seen so far in this segment. Lucid is saying you're going to get 440 plus miles of range in this vehicle. It's also going to be quick, 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds. Lucid is really focusing on a set of priorities and objectives that I think more EV shoppers are interested in, as opposed to towing and off-roading, which not as many people do on a regular basis. This is going to be relatively large inside. We don't have final dimensions here, but they say that behind the first row of seats, you're going to get 112 cubic feet of usable cargo space. That's going to put this nearly in minivan territory. It's certainly going to be way bigger on the inside than the average ICE three-row SUV. So if you're looking for lots of cargo capacity, you definitely want to take a look at this. There's also going to be a huge front trunk. They haven't sent us too many details on the front trunk, but they have shown us some pictures of it with people sitting in it. It definitely looks pretty large. Then we're going to get a pretty big and boxy cargo area behind. Let's talk about the design, I guess, first. On the outside, it definitely looks like a sleek, sporty wagon. It gives me a bit more of a wagon vibe than the Rivian R1S, which certainly is more upright and more boxy. But I actually think that's a good direction for the Gravity, because it's going to mean greater range, again, over 440 miles. And that range is partially thanks to a very sleek aerodynamic profile. The coefficient of drag is going to be just 0.24. The rear end design looks nice and clean and sleek. It gives me a little bit of maybe a modern Audi vibe with the way that the hatch wraps all the way around to the sides of the vehicle. Of course, get those flush handles. And this definitely looks like an EV version of the Lucid Air. And it's certainly going to be sharing a lot of EV tech with the Lucid Air. I don't have complete battery or motor specifications just yet, but again, they do say 0 to 60, 3.5 seconds. They're saying payload of 1,500 pounds and 6,000 pounds of towing capability. So it's not like they have disregarded towing capacity, they just haven't prioritized it quite as much as, say, a Rivian R1S or an R1T. We also are going to get an optional air suspension package in case you want to raise your vehicle off-road and give it a little bit more clearance if you do want to go further down that trail. They're not saying it's going to be anything like Rivian R1S levels of clearance, but it should give you a bit more capability and more confidence than an EV that's pretty low to the ground. Again, we don't have official drivetrain specifications, but they're also saying this is going to be using the same 900-volt native architecture that we find in the Lucid Air. And that's how we get the exceptional performance there and the really quick DC charging speeds. So like the Lucid Air, this is going to gain a lot of range in a relatively short window, and it's going to have a pretty flat charge curve. They're saying 200 miles of range in 15 minutes. That is not really telling us how much of the battery will charge in 15 minutes, although it theoretically could be a nearly 50% charge based on the amount of range you get total in the battery. Clearly, the fastest charging window is going to be about 10% to 80%, but 200 miles in 15 minutes is definitely going to be enough for a lot of road trips. And, of course, Lucid has said that they're going to be adopting the NACS connector at some point soon. So they are going to support that larger charging network of the Tesla superchargers, although we don't know exactly how those older 400-volt chargers are going to work with the Lucid lineup just yet. Now let's take a look at the interior, which, as you might expect, is definitely related in terms of its style to the Lucid Air. although there are a few changes in here, of course. The first one you're probably going to notice is the steering wheel, which is a bit more of a square wheel rather than just the flat bottom wheel that we find in the Lucid Air. We have a very similar big curved screen right behind the driver. It's approximately 34 inches. It's a really big OLED display. And it gives the interior at the same time a very modern vibe, but also maybe a bit more traditional than some EVs that have really moved the driver display away from the driver. So this is certainly more driver-centric, more driver-focused than a modern Tesla. It has the also feeling of giving you maybe a sort of a 4-screen setup in the dash where we have some controls for the driver on the left, a more or less traditional instrument cluster section in the middle, navigation on the right, and then infotainment below it. You'll also notice that we get what appear to be traditional air vents, so you don't have to worry about wiggling your finger on the screen to adjust the air vent. You just grab it and direct the air where you want to go. But the rest of the interior certainly has a very modern EV vibe. When we pan out from there, you'll notice we have a huge sheet of glass up front. It's basically windshield plus panoramic moonroof all grafted into one. There's essentially a structural beam right behind the driver and front passenger, and then there's a line that connects the rearview mirror and the safety systems, but other than that, it is one enormous expanse of glass, with even the little hooks for the sun visors being right there in the middle of that glass surface. If you're not a fan of big glass roofs, then you might not like this, but if you do love that look, then this is definitely taking that to the next level. Scrolling through some of these other photos, they've also sent us shots of the second row seats. Now I have to say, I haven't seen any shots of the third row, so we'll get to that in a bit. But the second row here looks pretty interesting. It's going to be 3 across seating. Seat belts obviously integrated into the seats because there is yet another big sheet of glass just above the second row seats. We're also going to get tray tables, sort of airline style there, with iPad holders on them so that way you can keep your tablet computers in check. And although it's difficult to talk about headroom in these photos, it is obvious that we have a completely flat floor back there, and we do have a relatively slim battery pack, something that we also see in the Lucid Air. So I suspect that headroom is going to be pretty generous in the second row. It is, again, a little bit difficult to tell. I suspect that getting into the third row, however, is going to be much easier than in some of the competition because of how they've chosen to mount these seat belts. And that is another interesting thing here. Because again, the seat belts for even the outboard seating positions are mounted to the second row. So once that seat moves forward, it's going to be easier to get back there into the way back without having to jump under or on top of a seat belt, something like that. At this point in time, Lucid has not sent me any photos of the third row, but it is going to be a 2-seat third row because the Lucid will seat up to 7. It's not going to seat 8, and they haven't made any comment about whether or not there will be a 6-seat version. I wouldn't be surprised if there was because that seems to be a pretty common thing to do in the luxury segment, to just delete a middle seat and give you more of a captain's chair vibe. We again don't know legroom or headroom figures, but I suspect the third row is going to be relatively large because when you look at the exterior profile, again, this has more of that sport wagon thing going on where we have a pretty horizontal roofline all the way to the rear. It does drop a little bit towards the back, but it's not an extreme drop in the rear. And that's part of why they give us that big sort of wing on the back of the rear hatch that helps clean up the aero profile and allows them to keep that roofline a little bit higher towards the rear. They also, in these photos, do appear to give the Lucid a little bit larger of a third row window than I had initially expected. Be sure and let me know what you're most curious about when it comes to the new Gravity down there in the comment section. I'm more curious about the dimensions of this vehicle because based on its interior cargo dimensions and just the photos that I've seen, I suspect this is decently larger than the Volvo EX90. The EX90 does have kind of a tight cargo area in the back. It's about the same size inside as a Volvo XC90, which is not the biggest 3-row vehicle in the luxury segment. And this does appear to be more accommodating as far as 3-row passengers and cargo area in the back. But it could also be a bit of an optical illusion because some of these photos do give it kind of a high-waisted, narrow greenhouse look, again really accentuating that length and accentuating the more sport wagon vibe that I get from some angles. But I am really intrigued because I do think it looks fantastic inside and out, and I think it's a really great blend of modern and traditional with the normal air vents, a more driver-centric setup in the dashboard rather than just having that one big central screen. Let me know what you think about all that, and of course stay tuned for additional LA Auto Show content coming up soon.